Good evening. Welcome to the beginning of Earth Day week, month, we hope year and beyond. My name is Nancy Najelski. I'm on the Environment Committee, which is chaired by Bill Roach. We are very lucky tonight. We have Dr. Richard Gammon here. He's a professor emeritus of chemistry and oceanography and an adjunct professor emeritus of atmospheric sciences at the University of Washington. He is a former co-director of the UW program on the environment. He received a BA in chemistry from Princeton and his master's and PhD in physical chemistry from Harvard. In 1990, Dr. Gammon co-authored the first scientific assessment by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change. As chief of the carbon dioxide program, he directed the U.S. program to globally monitor atmospheric CO2. He has taught undergraduate and graduate courses in chemistry, oceanography, atmospheric science, biogeochemical cycles, and climate change. His research has emphasized measurements and interpretation of atmospheric trace gases critical to climate change. There's a theme here. Dr. Gammon remains actively engaged in doing presentations just like this to improve the public's understanding of the climate change challenge and possible responses. We are very lucky to have him, so please join me in giving him a warm welcome.
Well, thank you, Nancy. I'm very pleased to be here. I spoke here many years ago. Gordon might remember. And happy to come again and talk with you. Students tell me that I talk too fast, and that'll probably happen tonight. All these slides will be available to you. They're being recorded, so you can go back at your leisure and look at these images again. And again, if you have any questions or follow-up questions, we'll have a chance for a discussion at the end. You can always email me or call me. I'm happy to continue the conversation with you. So let's just jump right into it. This is our grandson, Jesse, on the beach, Santa Monica. And of course, where he's standing will be underwater before he's grown. The way I say it is that the mean high tide today will be the mean low tide in the lifetime of children born today. It's possible that we'll have 4 or 5 feet of sea level rise as a global average. So anyway, Jesse is still a tiny kid. He's very small, but he's really sweet. And when I speak to audiences that I don't know, and I don't know their politics, I often talk about children and grandchildren, because that connects people across generations. And we often don't look 7 generations out, as we should, but we often look 1 or 2 generations out. Even if you don't have children, you know people who have children. You think about the next generation. We won't all be here, but they will, and we have to think of them. So let's go then through the slides, and if I know how to advance, let's see. I probably messed this up. Nope, it's working. All right, I'm going to talk quickly in 2 parts. The first part will be summarizing the physical climate science. So when I give presentations, I often say, this is not my opinion. I'm giving you the international scientific consensus on where we are. Science is falsifiable. It moves ahead. It's provisional always and always changing. And the science often can lag the events that are happening in your life. But it is the best description we have at the time for the nature of physical reality. And we have to pay attention to the science. It's not debatable. It was actually when Al Gore spoke in the summer of 1988, and he said he was 99% sure we were in the greenhouse century. Other climate scientists, oh boy, you're way out there. But within 10 years, the signal came above the noise, and within 15 or 20 years, the scientific consensus was yes. 95, 99% of all the climate scientists says, yes, it's happening, it's real, we're doing it. But there's hope if we act. And so I've been called Dr. Doom. The science is pretty difficult, And you have to grieve for what we have lost and will lose in the natural world with the animals and people and plants which will be moving poleward as climate is changing. But we have to preserve as much as we can and work for a future for our children and our grandchildren. Okay, in the second part, I want to talk about, this is just the science then, and then I'm going to talk about, okay, this is the impact of the climate change science globally and North America, the United States, and then finally focusing on the state of Washington and the Pacific Northwest. So we'll come down to those levels, starting from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the U.S. National Climate Assessment mandated by Congress every 4 years. These reports come out. And then at the University of Washington, the Climate Impacts Group has offered good reports on impacts in the Pacific Northwest and here in Cascadia as well. So this just summarized again. And again, if you want to read more about it, Google IPCC and you can get these reports. I helped write the first report, but they come out about every 5 or 7 years. And as I say, the National Climate Assessment is mandated every 4 years or so. And then Northwest Region, the Climate Impacts Group at the university has put out many good reports. So the first international language on this was the Framework Convention on Climate Change in 1996. Just reading, the ultimate objective is to stabilize the greenhouse gases, quote, at a level that will prevent dangerous man-made interference with the climate system. I would argue that we're already there. It's already happening. Quote, such a level should be achieved within a time frame sufficient to allow ecosystems to adapt naturally to climate change. Are we doing that? To ensure that food production is not threatened. Are we doing that? And to enable economic development to proceed in a sustainable manner. That's the whole ball of wax. That's what we have to do. And we're not doing very well on that so far. And then the Paris Accord, which we signed, said the overarching goal is to hold the, quote, increase in global average temperature to well below 2 degrees C, above pre-industrial levels, and to pursue efforts to limit temperature increases to 1.5 degrees C above pre-industrial. I would argue that we may actually bust through that 1.5, not just within your lifetime, but within the next 2 or 3 years. And so if we overshoot that, then we're going to have to come back down. We may need to mechanically actually remove CO2 from the atmosphere. We can't just rely on the trees. We need the trees, and the forests are important. Over generations, over at least 30 or 40 years, we can plant some little trees, and they will help take up CO2, but only over decades. So we may need to mechanically remove CO2 if we overshoot 1.5. So Dr. Holdren, who was a science advisor under Obama, said, these are our choices. Mitigation, adaptation, and suffering. Mitigation, avoiding the change to which we cannot adapt. And I submit that if we have a global warming of 5 degrees centigrade or more, double that for Fahrenheit, if you're calibrated in Fahrenheit, that this is catastrophic for modern civilization. And mass migrations, not just hundreds of millions, but billions of people will be moving out of areas that are no longer habitable. And moving where? They may be coming here. Within the United States, people are going to be moving north, as I'll show you in a slide later. And then adaptation is, some change is already happening now and cannot be avoided. We have to adapt to it. So adaptation and mitigation are the two aspects of our response to the climate change. And then when we burn fossil fuels, who benefits from it and who suffers? And so I live now, Carol and I live on Whidbey Island, and it's a beautiful community, lovely beaches, lovely walks, and we benefit, and we'd love to have our island community be self-sufficient, grow our own food, that's nice, but what about those people in the rest of the world who are suffering, have not put CO2 in the air, but are suffering consequences of it? So we owe them as well. Even if we can have a perfectly fine Pacific Northwest, Seattle, and the surrounding area, but by burning fossil fuel and putting CO2 in the air, we cause suffering elsewhere in the world. We're responsible for that. So who benefits, who suffers? It's an intergenerational equity issue. Again, I came at this from a climate science point of view. I didn't understand the social justice aspect of it, but that's certainly part of it, as is the biodiversity. All these things are linked together. So as Dr. Kate Marvel has said, NASA scientist, climate change is not a cliff that we fall off. It's a slope we slide down. Every bit makes it worse. No matter how far down the slope we go, there's no reason to give up hope for fighting. So if we can't stop at 1.5, but we stop at 2, that's better than 2.5. 2.5 is better than 3. 3 is better than 4. We have to sort of stop this warming. Now, can we stop sea level rise? No, I really don't think so. Even if we can hold the warming now at 1.5 or 2 degrees, sea level is going to still come up 5 feet, 10 feet, 20 feet, 30 feet, 60 feet, 70 feet. In a few hundred years, we may have 70 feet higher global sea level as we lose Greenland and the Antarctic ice sheet. And last time the Earth was this warm, we did lose those. So we know that has happened in the geological past. I'm not going to go over this. These are just some of the things that are happening in our world that make us realize that climate change is not just for future generations, but happening now. We're living, every month for the last 10 months has broken the all-time record for that temperature for that month. So we're in a period of unprecedented warming, warmer even than the climate scientists had predicted. Both the ocean temperature and the air temperature are record. And this warming started in the middle of last year and is continuing now. And here in the Northwest, most people have forgotten this already, but we had a heat wave here that killed 1,000 people. 1,000 people in Washington, Oregon, and British Columbia died in a few days of that heat wave. So it isn't just Sudan and other places. It's here in the Northwest as well. And it's not in the future, it's now. So again, I'm not going to go over all of these. You have these, and you can look at these slides later. I would just say that the CO2, as measured in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, is still increasing. It's not leveling off. It's not even linear. It's still accelerating. The warmth of the last 10 years, 15 years is greater than the rate of warming for the previous 30 or 40 years. And we may, in fact, have, if we double CO2, maybe instead of 2 or 3 degrees of warming, there are good scientists, including Jim Hansen, who say, you know, equilibrium warming for double CO2 is probably 3 or 4 or 5 degrees. We must not go there. We must not let that happen. I'll come back to some of these points later. Great Barrier Reef is suffering right now another catastrophic coral bleaching event. Coral bleaching in the tropic is related to ocean acidification, but mostly related to temperature of the water. Too hot. The corals expel the photosynthetic algae and end up with white skeletons. If we can stop the warming at 1.5 degrees, we might only lose 3/4 of all the coral reefs in the world. If we have 2 degrees warming or more, we may lose 99% of all the coral reefs in the world. If you've ever snorkeled on a coral reef, or been there with your children or your grandchildren, and you have to tell them, I'm sorry, we screwed up, we didn't stop in time, you'll never snorkel and see the fish again. It won't be there. Or if they come back, maybe we can recolonize corals in the future with warmer ocean, but we're not sure. So again, these are some of the things that are happening and will happen in our world. As I said, it's going to be very tough to keep the world warming of 1.5. Some of the island nations in the Western Equatorial Pacific wanted that number in there. I think we're going to be very hard pressed to stop at 2 degrees of warming, 2 degrees centigrade. And the warming now is probably as warm as it's been since the last interglacial, which was 120,000 years ago. We're there. And that time, the sea level was 50 feet or more higher than now. That's where we are now. And how about CO2? The CO2 level today, as measured in Mauna Loa, Hawaii, which is globally representative, is now higher than at any time since long before the origin of Homo sapiens, okay? That's 300,000 years ago. In fact, you can go back 3 million years ago to the origin of the genus Homo. Homo erectus and Neanderthals, those people. The CO2 level is higher now than the genus Homo. It's more than 4 million years is where the CO2 is now. And the warming lags that, so the warming will follow. We're in big trouble. You see why I'm called Dr. Doom. So this is one thing that's happening or will happen. These are places where some aspects of our world will not just be uncomfortable, they will be uninhabitable. People can't live there, can't grow their food, can't raise their children. What do? They will die or they will move. Where will they move? They'll move away from those uninhabitable areas. And in the northern hemisphere, Central America, Brazil, they're becoming up. What law, what wall is going to keep them out? And you'll see some places that will go south, they'll go poleward in both hemispheres, but there'll be mass migrations of people, not tens of millions, but hundreds of millions, billions of people perhaps, moving to places that are still habitable. Fire. We don't think about this so much here in Cascadia. Yes, we've had forest fires in Washington State, mainly east of Cascade Crest, right? But now, in recent years, many of the fires are happening west of the Cascade Crest. And where I live, Whidbey Island, the fire departments are very used to house fires. They're not very experienced in treating forest fires. And that fire in Texas recently was the largest fire in the history of Texas, enormous fire. So this is some of our concerns for the future: water availability, water quality, and fire as well. So in this first report that I helped write, here's the language. The unequivocal detection of the enhanced greenhouse effect is not likely for a decade or more. It's sort of saying, we think there's a signal there. This is 30 years ago, more than 30 years ago. But the noise is also really high, so we can't really see the signal to noise very well yet. Could be due to natural variability, but within a few years, it changed. So that even by this time, this is the 2013 year, so 20 or some years later, we're over here now. Likely, very likely, extremely likely. It is extremely likely, that's the confidence interval, that human influence has been the dominant cause of observed warming since the mid-20th century. Stronger language, each of these reports, stronger, 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 and now with great certainty. So Hansen was right. He was ahead of the curve, but we've now known for a decade or more that it's happening, it's real, and it's caused by human activity. So this is another report by 2021. It is now unequivocal, cannot equivocate. It is unequivocal that human influence has warmed the atmosphere, ocean, and land. And yet, we have a party, I'm not going to say which presidential candidate recently said, in replying to questions about possible human causation of climate change, we're not school children, let's have the debate. No, the debate's over. There's no debate about the science. You could debate about what to do about it, market, government, what do we do about it, but not about the science. We don't debate the science anymore. Climate science is in. It gets improved each year, but the basics are in. Yes, we had some good news. U.S. rejoined the Paris Accord, and our country's actually meeting their commitments under Paris. They're not. We're doing something. CO2 is still increasing. It's not leveled off or stopped. But yes, we need to plant trees. And warming, when we can stop the emissions of CO2, then soon after that, within a few years or a decade, the warming will stop. It's not going to go back down right away. Part of the CO2 will stay in the air for thousands of years. That's why we've got to think about mechanically removing some of that CO2. And I'll just leave it at that. So this is a figure from some years ago, but the consensus on climate change, climate scientists is in. As Gina McCarthy said, human-caused climate change is a greater degree of scientific uncertainty now than the long-accepted fact that smoking cigarettes causes cancer. We're more certain about climate change, human causation, than about cigarettes and cancer. Most people don't know that. A person is entitled to her own opinions, but not her own facts. Let's see. Oh, this is just a summary of the global atmospheric temperature measurements by a number of different sources, and they all pretty much agree. And there was a period after World War II when there was no warming, a lot of aerosols in the atmosphere, the foundation of EPA in 1970, and then an accelerated warming since then. I was responsible for the U.S. government program to measure CO2 in the atmosphere. This is the Mauna Loa record at Hawaii. And back in 1982 or 83, the level was 342 parts per million, 0.034%, and it was going up about 1 or 1.5 per year. And now we're at 420, and it's going up 2.5 parts per million per year, much faster. And this curve has got to sort of stop bending up, bend over, and stop going up. When CO2 stops going up, then we stop net zero. That is, the sinks will balance the sources, and we will be in a different situation. We have to get there, and the sooner the better. So this is the 10,000 years of CO2 reconstructed. We have direct measurements going back some decades, but if you want to go back thousands of years, then you have to use proxy measurements of CO2 from isotopes and ice cores. Oh, actually, to go back this far, 800,000 years, you can do it with direct measurements. You bring ice core up from the South Pole, you break it open, and the CO2 in bubbles, air that's trapped in the ice, measure the CO2 in those trapped air bubbles. So this is no assumptions here, it's direct measurement, and you can see we're above 420 now, and this is ice age, so interglacial, ice age, interglacial, ice age. This is 800,000 years of measurements. And you can see that during warm times it's about 250, and during cold times it's about 200, and now we're at 420 and running away. So, oh, sorry, yes, that's right. Then how can I point to things on the slide? All right, you're right, I need to stay over here. They told me that, stand here, because it's being recorded. All right, again, this is just showing the level of warming over the last 1,000 years, and then the level of warming, if you take CO2 out of it, you get the green curve. That's the natural variability, and with CO2 in, the brown shows the actual warming. Are the models any good? The models are doing pretty good. These are several different models, and their ability to hindcasting and forecasting to actually pretty accurately see where we are in terms of warming. Who's responsible? This is worth, I'm sorry, the horizontal scale is missing here, but you can see that 1910, 20, these are every 10 years, okay? And you can see that for a long time, in recent decades, we were number one. Europe started down some decades ago, and now the largest emitter each year is China. We're second, though, and we started down about 2005, 20 years ago, like 1% a year. But we need to go down like 5% a year. We're far off meeting our commitments. If we don't, we're going to breach this 1.5 degrees centigrade level soon, maybe within the next few years. And this just says that the total amount of warming you get is proportional to how much CO2 you put in the air, no matter when you put it in, since pre-industrial times. Most of it stays up there. Some of the CO2 will stay in the air for thousands of years. Yes, the trees are going to help. Protecting old growth forests is really important. Planting new trees is really important in the future. But we may have to mechanically remove some of the CO2. And this sort of says the higher emission curve we stay on, the more the warming will be. What does it do? It's not sun, it's not solar, it's not volcanic, it is greenhouse gases, QED. This is known. mainly CO2, secondarily methane, mainly in the agricultural sector. I would just say this looks at warming of 1 degree, model versus data, and then in the future, simulated warming for 1.5, 2, or 4 degrees C. Notice the warming is greater in the northern hemisphere than the south. That's because there's more land up here. The warming is greater on the land than over the ocean, observed. The warming is greater in the northern hemisphere than in the summer, observed. The warming is greater at night than during the day, observed. So all of these aspects of the model are seen in the actual measurements. And this is looking at changes in precipitation, looking out into the future for 1.5, 2, or 4 degrees C. And then you see high latitude moisture, but because it's warmer, a lot of that will be as rain, not as snow. And subtropical areas will get drier, with the exception of sub-Saharan Africa, which has large increase in rainfall. Where we are, not a big change for more or less, maybe slightly more rainfall, but coming in stronger rainfall events. This is soil moisture, and again, you can see drought in the central U.S., drought in South America, drought in South Africa, drought in Australia. Not too bad where we are, although if we go out far enough for warming, then we'll have a drought here in the Pacific Northwest as well. What about the oceans? The best summary is that the oceans are becoming hot, sour, breathless, toxic, and higher. What does that mean? Hot, because they're getting warmer. In fact, the oceans are setting record temperatures as well as the atmosphere. Sour, because CO2 is an acid gas. As CO2 is drawn into the ocean, it makes the oceans more acidic, ocean acidification. Breathless, because a warmer ocean holds less oxygen. And toxic, because of toxic algal blooms, and higher because of sea level rise. That's not the ocean we want to have. And then higher sea level rise will depend on Antarctic glaciers, Pine Island Glacier, and the Thwaites Glacier, and also the Greenland ice cap. And all of these are now melting faster than we had thought they were. And as Eric Renaud has said, the probability of extreme sea level rise of more than 2 meters, more than 6 feet, cannot be eliminated. Maybe that chance is only 10% for our grandchildren right now, but it just means it's the next generation after that. Sea level rise is something that's going to be very, very hard to stop. Even after we stop the warming, sea level does not go back down. It keeps coming up until we get this temperature down low enough that we're reforming ice in Greenland and Antarctica. So this shows you where sea level might go. If you look out to 200 years, then on the far right, you can see the sea level might be several meters, 2, 3, 4 meters or more. Again, all these depend upon the trajectory that we take in terms of reducing carbon dioxide emissions. So I'm going to stop there and see if there's a question on the science, and then we're going to talk a little bit about impacts, adaptation, and then what you can do about it. So let me stop there and see if there are questions in the audience on the science that I presented. Again, this is not political. This is the international scientific consensus. This is where the science is right now. Questions on the science? And I'm sorry if that was really fast. Please.
How do they remove CO2 from the atmosphere?
Oh, we're jumping ahead a little bit. Of course, trees do that naturally. With sunlight, oxygenic photosynthesis removes CO2 and makes plant tissue, and that, because trees have deep roots, that increases soil carbon. So that's a longer term sink, a natural sink, and we have to protect our old growth forests. Manually, mechanically, one way is you have air drawn through a filter, an alkaline filter, and the CO2 is captured in this alkaline filter on the solution, and then the filter is drained, and you remove the CO2 from the solution, concentrate it, and then you have to bury it in a geologically gas-tight reservoir. So direct mechanical removal of CO2 by direct air capture is what it's called, with geological burial. How expensive is that? $1,000 a ton? Right now, the current price of carbon, if you buy carbon emissions, if you fly to Europe for vacation or whatever, $30, $50 a ton. It's variable. If you're buying carbon offsets, we can talk about carbon offsets, but of that order, $50 a ton. So right now, direct air capture is prohibitively expensive. We're not really doing it as a world. We're having some experimental plants. If you have a source of energy which doesn't generate any CO2, like geothermal energy in Iceland, where some of these plants are operating, then you can do that. If you have to burn coal to then you've lost it. Doesn't make any sense. So direct air capture, that's one way. Another question, yeah.
In one of your earlier slides, you showed that 2 or 3% or something like that of scientists still oppose the belief that, global warming is occurring. What is their argument?
I should have made the slide up to date. That probably was a slide from 5 or 10 years ago. I would say that now that 99% of people actively engaged in climate science accept the science of climate change. I don't think there's any rational counter-argument. There are some people with those views, but I wouldn't say that their arguments are based upon the science.
Which are the areas that there's still some uncertainty, like cloud feedback, and what are the scientists really working on now to try to pin down some of the areas where there is some uncertainty in detail?
Thanks, Gordon. Yes, an important cloud feedback. If you're the sun and you're looking at the Earth, and the Earth is either dark, like green, or white, like clouds. If it's white, more sunlight is reflected back to space, and that means less sunlight is getting in to heat the Earth. So cloud feedback is a stabilizing feedback. It's negative. If you can make more white clouds over the ocean, or you can make more high cirrus clouds in the stratosphere, these both have a cooling effect on warming. And what fraction of the warming is currently being countered by these cooling clouds? Maybe a third or a little more. And so, yes, one of the suggestions is that what we have to do in the future is make the Earth whiter, so less sunlight is getting in to heat the planet. And that's an active area of research, for certain. And probably the aerosol cloud feedback is probably the greatest uncertainty now in making future predictions. Last question before we jump on to the rest of the talk. Yes?
What's the mechanism for greater warming at night than during the day?
Because these cloud feedbacks don't operate at night. The aerosol cloud feedbacks. For the whiteness to matter, you've got to have sunlight coming in. I think that's the main thing. Okay, let's go on to this, and there'll be time right at the end for more questions, I think. Now, I may need help to get to the next. Where's our tech person? Here she comes. Just to finish this and get another slide, the other half of the presentation up. I'm combining two different talks. That's why I'm racing, and why we have two pieces of it here. Number 2. Okay. Thank you so much. Oh, okay. Cool. I'm too old. Here's Jesse again. And these are the resources that I say to, if you want to read more on your own about this, go to the IPCC, U.S. National Climate Assessment, or the Climate Impacts Group. This was an important paper on can we stop it at 1.5 degrees C? Or we're going to go well beyond that. This was 5 or 6 years ago. And again, these are scenarios for different levels of warming, from a warming where we have a minimal increase in CO2 to business as usual. And you could see that the warming could be well under 2, maybe 1.5 with a little overshoot, or we could go to 5 degrees in the lifetime of children born today by 2100. Again, we may blast right through that 1.5 barrier in the next year or two. Here's the CO2 record again and the temperature record that I've shown you before. In the 2022 IPCC report, our report clearly indicates that places where people live and work may cease to exist, and that ecosystems and species that we've all grown up with that are central to our culture and inform our languages may disappear. This is a threat not just to human habitation, to agriculture, but to biodiversity and to modern civilization as it is. And as Professor Dessler says, adaptation is the Band-Aid, it's not the solution. We can adapt, we're going to have to adapt to changes that we've already built in. But it's not the solution. The solution is to stop the warming, right? And to get the CO2 back out of the air. This is a pattern from last summer, which is the hottest year since the last interglacial, 120,000 years ago, and we're still on that same track. But every month for the last 9 months has broken all the records for atmospheric temperature and for ocean temperature, both. And again, this is a little bit of the El Nino, which is gone now. We're in a La Nina or neutral phase. And the warming, the rainfall is going to, again, the precipitation will be more at high latitude, less in equatorial and subequatorial regions where billions of people live. Already, drought is really affecting agricultural production throughout the world. Oops, let me go back. This sort of says, a little bit out of date slide, but it sort of says, if you want to stay under 2 degrees, you've got to start down now. You've got to stop. You have to get net zero CO2 and then go down. And then sometime in the future, to go net negative, you're going to have to pull some CO2 back out of the air. If you don't, you might end up at 5 or 6 degrees of warming. That's where we might go if we don't get serious about this problem. And so I like this slide because it says we're now at about, this is billions of tons of CO2 per year emitted. We're at about 40 billion tons a year. How many people there are in the world? 10 billion people? That's about 4 tons per person per year. Global average. What's the US average? 15 or 20. 15 or 20 tons per person per year. So we got to get down. We got to cut it in half by 2030. Are we going to do it? And then cut that in half by 2040. And then cut that in half by 2050. Then we're down there. We're down there close, but still you need to have to stop deforestation and reforest, and actually have some direct removal, direct air capture or some other way. If we do that, then we might actually meet net zero by 2050. We might. I'd say we're not on this trajectory yet, but this is a path, a possible path to the future. To get half of our emissions gone by 2030, yikes, that's only 6 years away. And then cut that in half in 10 years, and then cut that in half in 10 years, so that by 2050 we might have, quote, net zero. Stop the increase in CO2, which means stop the warming. But then you're still not safe. The sea level's still coming up. You're going to have to get back down. So this is the latest climate assessment, a special climate report about the U.S. situation. And just so you know, these are the sectors of emissions for the United States. What's the biggest one? Transportation. Well, maybe in this audience, you don't drive, right? Some of you don't need to drive anymore. That's good, because you're not emitting CO2. Take a bus or work together. And even if you do still drive, if you're going to buy another car, make it an electric car. Or if not an electric car, because you have range anxiety, then do a hybrid, a plug-in hybrid or something. And if you have to fly to see grandchildren or go to Europe for vacation or drive a lot, pay a carbon offset. Put that money to work to help people who are suffering from the climate change that we've already caused. So transportation is number one. Electrical generation is important, although Puget Sound Energy is going to go totally carbon neutral soon. And agriculture is, for the U.S., about 10% of the emissions. So yes, eat less red meat. That's good, because cows burp a lot of methane, and methane is extremely potent greenhouse gas. About a third of the warming is due to methane, and half of that is agricultural. This just shows what the temperature distribution was when I was a boy. I was born in 43. And then in a more recent decade, everything's kind of shifted over to the hot side. So our climate, the Northern Hemisphere climate, is moving. And this is looking out to the future, mid-20th century, late 21st century, and you can see what the pattern of the warming predicted that way. And again, you could find Seattle, and yeah, we're relatively least affected in this, but there'll be significant warming here as well. This is a pattern of drought. And looking out to the end of the century, you can see upper right figure, extreme soil moisture drying in our western states. How about here in the Northwest? So this is a Washington State Department of Ecology. The impacts here will be warmer temperatures, reduced summer snowpack, winter in the snowpack, extreme weather events, and rising sea level. And we're already experiencing some of these now. Here's that same pie diagram for Washington State. Hey, look at transportation. It's not just a quarter, it's almost half of it is transportation related. In fact, agriculture is now hidden under this other category. It may be 10% or less. Electrical generation, because we have some hydropower here, where our electrical power is cleaner than many places in the United States, residential, commercial. But anyway, notice how important transportation is. When the wind blows the wrong way, we get that smoke. We can get that smoke from forest fires in eastern Washington blowing our way. So we've had this, and this is a problem for the future, is fire and air quality issues. This is two relatively recent reports from the Climate Impacts Group about climate change in the state of Washington and in the Puget Sound region. So you can go read these papers and learn more about it. They are a little bit out of date now, so they need a new reports coming out. But here's the heat wave that I mentioned that killed 1,000 people here in the Northwest, especially in British Columbia. This is the actual temperature record for the state of Washington, Pacific Northwest. These are some of the changes which might come with even 1.5 degrees of warming here. More hot days, reduced snowpack, higher winter stream flow, lower summer stream flow, and sea level rise. Again, some of our glaciers will completely disappear. Again, you could, like your grandchildren or your great-grandchildren that you used to snorkel with, and since there are no more tropical, if the coral reefs are gone, you can't snorkel with them, and you also can't walk and see the glaciers because the glaciers won't be there. They'll be gone. So some recent years have been pretty bad here in the Northwest for agriculture and for our migrating fish. We lost turkey tie last summer, and the southern resident orcas are in great danger of extinction. Not a dark extinction, not extinction where we never name the species. We know this one. We see this. We count them. We know every one, every member, when they come or when they don't come, or when they die or when their babies die. So this is, if we lose the southern resident orcas, we will know it. It'll happen on our watch. What about sea level rise here in the Northwest? Well, if we have a meter or two, then millions of Americans are going to be moving back from the sea. If you have enough money, maybe you can put your house up on stilts. Maybe you can take your house and move it up the hill. But there are a lot of people who don't have that kind of money, and they won't be able to buy the insurance. If they have enough money, they'll just leave that house and move here. They'll move north. They'll move north. If you don't have money and you can't fix your house, you'll hang on in the waterlogged and flooded places where you've always lived. And again, whether we get 6 feet in the lifetime of children born today or in the lifetime of their children or grandchildren, that's on the way. It's almost built in. It's almost unstoppable unless we stop the warming and start back down. This sort of says which states are going to be at the greatest risk for sea level rise. And you see, of course, it's Florida, Louisiana, and East Coast states. And we're about the same as California. We're a little better than Oregon, because Oregon doesn't have so many low-lying areas like Puget Sound. But the risk of sea level rise is about the same as for California. So if we had only like a 1 meter sea level rise, then we might have 100,000 people displaced within the state of Washington. And so there was a report from the Climate Impacts Group about what sea level rise would be, led by Ian Miller, Sea Grant person. And this was a good report. I personally think it's a little too conservative. It doesn't leave the possibility of a greater sea level rise. And so here's another reports by Union of Concerned Scientists and Zillow, the real estate data, and they predict a much higher sea level rise, again, in the lifetime of children born today. Whoops, let me go back. I'm almost done, and we'll have a chance for questions in just a minute. So I love to go see the tulips in the Skagit every spring. Well, again, what are you going to tell your grandchildren when the tulips are underwater? No more tulips? No more snorkeling? No more glaciers? What is the Northwest going to be like? So this is the areas that are going to be inundated and which cities are going to be gone. We live near Langley, and again, even Whidbey Island is going to be subject to major changes when the sea level comes much higher. And don't think that sea level rise is just for the future. There are people suffering today from sea level rise, especially in low-lying island nations in the western equatorial Pacific. New Zealand has said, well, we'll take a few hundred every year. They've applied for asylum to leave their island nation as it goes underwater, bearing the graves of all their ancestors, and they have to go someplace else because they can't live there anymore. That's happening now. So here's one economic study that sort of says, okay, economics is going to be bad for agriculture, bad for the Southeast. Where are they going to go? The green areas are where economics says there'll be improvements. Hey, we look pretty good. Maybe they'll be coming here. People will be moving north. Trees will try to move north. Other animals will try to move north. Birds will be migrating north. So people will be leaving equatorial areas and moving poleward in both hemispheres, especially in the northern hemisphere. So this is where the billion-dollar disasters have been. None for us, right? Hey, not bad. So I think we're going to have to prepare for mass migration of people within the United States moving within the U.S. Now, that's not even talking about Nicaragua and people in Central America or South America who will come to our border and stand requesting asylum, requesting their right to a hearing. So we have to be prepared for mass migrations of people within nations and between nations. So I'm almost done here. Here I am blabbing away up front. Green living, livable cities, clean water, blah, and this guy stands up in the back and says, what if it's all a hoax and we create a better world for nothing? Well, let's do it. Let's create that better world. We need to. As Lincoln said, let the people know the facts, and the country will be safe. What can we do? We can try to reduce the severity of the warming by, first of all, reducing our emissions. And then we can be more resilient and adapt to the changes that we can no longer avoid because they're already built in. This young man was the face of AIDS, HIV for South Africa, and he died at age 12, I think. But something he said before he died, this is beautiful. Do all you can with what you have in the time you have where you are. We can all do that. We can all do something. Beautiful words. Remember what Nkosi Johnson said. And I like this thing that Catherine Hayhoe said. She's a good climate scientist, chief scientist for the Nature Conservancy. the most important thing you can do for climate change is talk about it. Now, I have a brother who's a petroleum engineer in Houston, and it's very hard to talk with him about climate change. So you may have some people in your family for whom this is a hard conversation, but don't avoid it. Find ways to engage people in conversation. Listen respectfully to what their point of view is. Engage them and try to tell them at least the science. You can talk about what you personally think we should do, but at least the science should be objective and not political. I think I'm done. Oh yeah, I like this poem by Drew Derringer. I'll stop with this. It's 3:23 in the morning and I'm awake because my great-great-grandchildren won't let me sleep. My great-great-grandchildren ask me in my dreams, what did you do when the planet was plundered? What did you do when the earth was unraveling? Surely you did something. When the seasons were failing, and the mammals, reptiles, and birds were all dying, did you fill the streets with protests when democracy was stolen? What did you do once you knew? Thank you. Questions?
Oh, okay. So
We've talked a little bit about some of the little things we can do, but I'd really appreciate if you could elaborate and talk more about what individuals and like Horizon House community can do.
The first thing we can do is be more efficient. The best source of energy. Oh, okay. I'll try to put this on again. Is that better? All right. The best source of energy and water is the energy and water we don't waste. So being more efficient, like we have a really old water heater in our house. We turn on the tap, wait for the hot water, water's running, wasting all that water, right? So that's one thing. Be more efficient in the energy you use. Of course, you have a special situation here. And if through group action you can change the way in which your apartment is heated or cooled, or the way in which your water is heated, that's important. And as a group, maybe you can do that. So again, for people who have their own home, electrify your home and transportation energy. Stop burning fossil fuel. So if you can, don't use a central furnace anymore. Get a ductless heat pump. And if you have a house, you can put solar panels on the roof. I did, and we get a check for $2,000 every year from Puget Sound Energy. So my electricity is free now. And I plug in my car every night, charge it up. So there are things that we can do. Protect existing forests and wetland. And new buildings and septic tanks, and this is especially for people who live on the water or near the water, make sure that your septic system is well above the future high tide line, not the existing high tide line. And then measure your personal or family carbon footprint and reduce it. And then when you travel to see grandchildren or vacation in retirement, buy a carbon offset and put that money to work, both for adaptation and mitigation. Other questions?
Oh, yeah. Hi. Could you repeat again? You said something about what the CO2 something that like tons per person
Yes.
per capita was?
Right. The global number is about 40 billion tons per year. The U.S. population, the global population is about 10 billion people. Divide those and you get 4 tons per person per year as a global average. And the U.S. number is 4 or 5 times that. So per person, the U.S. number is 15 to 20 tons CO2 per year. That's as CO2. If you want to say as carbon, then it's 10 billion tons of carbon for the planet. And there's 10 billion tons of people, so 1 ton as measured as C, not as CO2. Other comments, questions, please.
If I understood one of your slides correctly, China was the major contributor to CO2 emission.
Today.
How do we convince them to change?
They are not only the major producer of CO2 in the world today, but we were for a long time. They've passed us now. We're number 2. We need to have constructive conversations with China about all these environmental problems. I'm upset that they're what's a road and something road? What's their program called? Building road. Yes, that's based upon coal. They want these new countries to have coal-fired power plants, and if we could convince China is both the biggest source of coal emissions in the world, but also the major producer of electric vehicles, and much cheaper than we make them, right? Half price or something, $15,000 instead of 30 or 40. How much is a Tesla now? A lot. So until electric vehicles are as cheap as gasoline-powered cars, and that's coming sometime. When people always buy a new car every 5 or 10 years, for those who are still driving, then consider a plug-in electric vehicle where you can drive 20 or 30 miles a day, which we do on Whidbey Island, and then if you have to go to Portland or take a long trip to see grandchildren, then the motor kicks in and you could drive as if it was a regular car. That's one solution to the range anxiety problem. I think that within a few years there'll be enough charging stations and charging will be fast enough that people will say, hey, no problem. I could drive to Los Angeles and plug in and have a cup of coffee, half an hour, and get on the road again. So that's coming. It's not quite there yet, but it's coming. Other questions, comments? I didn't want it to be all Dr. Doom. I mean, these are things that people can do, and even in this environment, you can have some influence on the emissions from your living here. Yes.
What's the impact of train or railroad transportation?
Okay, good question. I think that if you have to, if you want to compare just flying versus driving, for example, for first start, I've read that short-haul aircraft is really inefficient. In Europe, they sort of want you to go on the train if you can. Up to 200 or 300 miles, it's much better not to fly. Like if you go to Portland or something like that, don't fly there. Take the bus or the train there. Beyond 300 or 400 miles, if you're going to go across the country, then if you have a fuel-efficient car, it may be actually better to drive than to fly. I'm sorry, I had it backwards. Better to fly than to drive for long haul.
What about trains?
I don't know as much about trains, but I think that trains are probably even better. And Europe has a good system of trains. We don't yet. So even to go from here to Los Angeles on the train, I don't know the numbers, how you would compare that with driving. I don't know. But in general, yes, trains are better than either flying or driving. Yeah.
There was just an article, I think, in New York Times or just last week on the fact that if you're going across country now in the U.S., you're better off flying than trains, because trains just aren't. The only place that trains probably work the best are the East Coast because they're electrified.
Right.
Otherwise, you're probably take your choices.
Yeah, I did see that. Thank you for that. Other comments, questions? There's one more over there. And I apologize for going so quickly through the slides, but this has all been recorded. You can go back and see this again or study the references. Yes?
I was fascinated by your chart that showed the migration in the United States that is likely to occur. And it occurred to me that north of us in Canada and in the north part of Europe, in Russia, there are vast amounts of land which is not very usable because it's cold now.
Yep.
And that's going to change, right?
That's going to change.
So that's where a lot of people will migrate to.
That's right. And those people from Texas or Florida who want to come to the Pacific Northwest, some of them are going to go on to BC. And yes, as climate warms, Canada is relatively underpopulated. So people will move there as well. Yeah.
Richard, one of the problems with trying to talk to your mining engineer brother-in-law and all of the people like that. They have the following kind of argument that you can't simply do away with fossil fuels, otherwise people will freeze. And this conversation went on, of course, when Russia invaded Ukraine and cut off gas supplies. So there's have to be some allowance for the reaction people have, even here in the Northwest. If you try and build too many solar farms, you don't have transmission lines sufficient, and meanwhile people run out of fuel. So there's a really tough balancing act.
And it's a transition. You don't do everything all at once.
Right.
Yep. Thank you for that. Yeah, it's a transition, and it's going to happen over time, but we want to go as quickly as we can to minimize suffering and save as much of the natural world as we can. Yes?
I'm interested in the retail business here. That is, how individuals can feel helpful in supporting this project. The massive world figures are very impressive, but what can individuals really do? For example, you are in a facility here where there are 500 or 600, I think, fairly informed and concerned people who would like to do something. But what would happen if our CEO said, as of the 1st of next month, there'll be no red meat served in the food services here?
I don't think you can mandate that. I think you can encourage that, and some people have gone to no red meat a long time ago. I would say if you can get people, I'm the cook now in our family, get people to say, I'm going to eat less red meat. I'm going to have more seafood. I'm going to have a meatless meal once or twice a week. So get people on a transition, and eventually maybe they'll be meatless, but you can't make people change that don't want to change. Transportation is almost half of the emissions in this state is transportation, not red meat. Okay, thank you very much.